If you believed Louisiana was solely synonymous with Mardi Gras and voodoo, it's time to broaden your perspective. This region is teeming with an array of fascinating wildlife, unique flora, and rich history. Here are 20 unusual finds that the wetlands of Louisiana have to offer. Number 20. Mysterious bubbles. These are one of the more weird results in the way that wetlands work, as all the dead stuff and organic matter, which is mainly just plant material and nothing too gross, usually falls to the bottom of the watery swamp. It then begins to decompose. This process of decomposition causes gases to form, and that gas becomes methane. This is the natural result of the process that's caused by the anaerobic bacteria as they work to break down the plant junk in the water. The combination of warm climate, lack of oxygen in the basin, and large quantities of organic stuff all contribute to the extra gassy problem of the Louisiana wetlands. So, as the gas forms beneath the surface, it eventually forms bubbles that will rise to the surface because, as you probably know, gas has to be released somewhere. Anyways, the bubbles that form can be small, like peas, or much larger, and these can sometimes stretch to be a surprising size, even several feet across. These mysterious bubbles, although not really all that mysterious since we know exactly what causes them, are generally not a massive problem, but they can be a bit of a nuisance for people in boats on the water. Number 19. Alligator nests. American alligators were brought back from the brink of extinction. They were put on the endangered species list back in 1967, but they've made such a comeback that, within the last 20 years, they're no longer endangered. Nowadays, these extraordinary reptiles can be found all over the southern states, in particular, in the swamps of Louisiana and Florida. Since they can grow to between 10 and 15 feet long and weigh as much as 1,000 pounds, alligators do mean serious business. In Louisiana, they are a common sight. They inhabit the waters of the swamps and wetlands all across the state, and care needs to be taken to avoid any dangerous encounters with these especially bitey creatures. In the spring, alligators begin their courting rituals, which culminates in mating in May and June. And after this, females will make their nests and lay their eggs. They'll often build their nests in the more shallow waters of the wetlands, and naturally, they can be extra feisty if people or pets go poking about in those areas. After a period of around 63 to 68 days of incubation, the eggs then hatch, usually from mid-August through to September, and then all the cute little babies appear. However, you'll also want to look out for their mothers. Number 18. The floating marsh islands. The wetland area of Louisiana's coast has been rapidly disappearing in recent decades. The rising water levels have literally changed this landscape, and places where there was once land, there is now only water as far as the eye can see, and that, my friends, is not really cool. There are some weird-sounding efforts to give the area a helping hand in providing habitats for many of the birds and other creatures that have been made homeless by the loss of this rich and diverse habitat. And the way that they're doing it is by building floating islands off the coast of Houma in Louisiana. These so-called islands are, somewhat ironically, being made from some of the very stuff that has been causing all of the problems in the first place, that being plastic. These fossil fuel-derived items are being recycled and turned into kinds of mats that are then floated on the surface of the water in an effort to reduce the erosion and expansion of the area of the wetlands. Again, these islands are approximately 8 to 10 inches thick, and the mats are designed so that native plants will be able to grow their roots through them and anchor themselves into the bottom of the marsh. This will then allow for debris and organic matter to gather beneath, and as that gradually builds up, the islands will slowly get stronger and become more permanent. Number 17. Cypress Knees. In the cypress swamps of Louisiana, cypress knees can be seen everywhere. These are the distinctive woody things that poke out above the surface of the water all throughout the swamps. These projections can be seen above the normal water level, and they're found growing out of the roots of cypress trees, with an almost right-angled bend. Weirdly enough, although there has been plenty of hypothesizing over the years, nobody actually knows the real purpose of these protrusions. So what are these? They're called cypress knees. Amongst the ideas are assumptions that these knees are there to provide oxygen to the submerged root system of the tree, but there's no evidence that it's actually the case. The theory was even tested by removing the knees of swamp cypresses, and those trees did not die off or seem to be affected in any way whatsoever. Really, other tests were performed on the knees, and nothing indicates that they provide any kind of benefits. Another notion is that they're there to provide structure and stability in the flood-prone areas of the wetlands. Number 16. Migratory birds. During the winter months, the wetlands of Louisiana become a haven for many migratory birds. They often spend the season there in the relative safety of the swamps, where there is food for them to eat and the temperatures are more warm. There are also many other types of birds that make the bayou their homes all year round. Amongst the dozens of different species that live there, you can typically find the brown pelican. These are actually the state bird of Louisiana, and they live all along the Gulf Coast, where they can be seen diving for fish and scooping them up in their massive bills. Then there's the great blue heron. These big birds live in the wetlands all year round and enjoy the bounty of seafood that's available to them. They're even seen to eat massive catfish. Then there are the bright red northern cardinals. These birds will forage for nuts, fruit, and seeds in the brush. And then we have the great egret. These huge birds have a big wingspan, but they're extremely lightweight. They're especially fond of crawfish dinners that are available to them in the wetlands of Louisiana. As well as all of these birds, it's common to see blue jays, red-tailed hawks, seaside sparrows, eastern bluebirds, common yellowthroats, Carolina wrens, and to keep things suitably gothic, the American crow. Number 15. Nutria. These big rodents have webbed feet and prefer to swim in the water more than hang out on the land. They live in burrows on the riverbank or in shores of lakes and other areas of wetland. Long-toothed rodents are exceptionally strong swimmers and able to remain submerged for as much as 5 minutes at a time without having to resurface for air. The nutria is actually native to South America, but these large rodents have been transplanted to areas all around the world and can now be found in many other places, which includes Canada and more than a dozen different United States. In fact, the reason that these creatures have wound up in other countries is, as you may have guessed, human activity. This time around, people are responsible for taking them from South America and keeping these unforgettable animals on fur farms. The trouble is that the nutria, as is their responsibility as prisoners with a death sentence, have tried and sometimes succeeded to escape from captivity. Those animals have made it to freedom and seem to be very adept at mating and establishing large and wild populations in these new countries. So, these days, the nutria is basically just a naughty invasive species found in all manner of places that has no business being there at all. Number 14. The bald cypress swamp. As we've already seen, the cypress is a tree that is found thriving in the swamplands of Louisiana. Bald cypress swamps of the American South are utterly unique amongst the various ecosystems of the world. These swamplands are full of bald cypress trees that thrive in the soggy and often flooded conditions of the lowlands. As deciduous conifers, bald cypress trees lose their leaves every year. The leaves, while they have them, are needle-like and kind of feathery in their arrangement, and these trees reproduce themselves by creating small rounded cones that contain their seeds. Then they're distributed by the water. These trees themselves can grow up to 100 feet tall and flourish in the waterlogged soil of the swampy wetlands of Louisiana and other southern states. In addition to their remarkable adaptability to aquatic environments, bald cypress trees play a critical role in the ecosystem, providing habitat and food for a wide range of wildlife. Their knobby knees that protrude from the water are not only iconic but also serve as an adaptation to their flooded environment, potentially helping the trees with gas exchange. Furthermore, the wood of the bald cypress is highly valued for its durability and resistance to rot, making it a popular choice for construction, especially in wet conditions. The bald cypress swamps also act as natural flood protection, absorbing excess water during heavy rains and storms, showcasing the importance of these ecosystems beyond their ecological value. Number 13. Ghost orchids. Next up, we have the kind of cool-sounding ghost orchid. These are very rare plants that, when they can be found at all, love to reside in places like Louisiana. What makes the ghost orchid so special is the fact that it is mycoheterotrophic. This means that they get all of their essential nutrients from a relationship that they have with various fungi, rather than the usual plant style of using photosynthesis. These orchids seem to get their name from their appearance. They have a very pale and ghostly white or extremely pale pink flower that will bloom only briefly in the summer, and because they don't have leaves and all of that usual foliage green from chlorophyll, on account of having no need for it, they have an almost translucent, ethereal appearance that makes them blend right into the rest of their habitat. They are especially well suited to the wet and warm conditions of the shaded areas around swamps and bogs. And these days, in Louisiana, the ghost orchid is endangered and has been given protection by state laws. This rarity is caused by all the usual suspects: habitat loss, illegal gathering, and the need for the flower to have very specific things present in its environment. It's hoped that the conservation efforts now taking place will be enough to save this plant from oblivion in the future. Number 12. Spanish moss. Next up, we have the stuff that makes trees in the South look like trees in the South. This is Spanish moss, and you'll see it growing everywhere all over the trees of the southern states of the United States. This is a kind of flowering plant that's known as epiphytic, meaning that the plant grows on the surface of another plant and gets its nutrients from the air and water around it, rather than being a parasite towards the plant on which it lives. Spanish moss lives on trees. Most specifically, it can be found on the southern live oak trees and the bald cypress trees of the southern states. It's especially common in the state of Louisiana, but not exclusive to that place, as it's found all across the whole southern region. Because of its ubiquitous nature, Spanish moss has become associated with certain types of Southern Gothic imagery that tell tales of dark pasts of the American South through stories of decay and desperation, madness, and supernatural and grotesque stuff. But as well as being symbolic of the South, Spanish moss has also had some practical use. It's been used for building insulation, for mulch, and for handy packing material as well as mattress stuffing. In the early days of car production, it was used to stuff the seats of vehicles, and in the early part of the 20th century, Spanish moss was cultivated and processed for a wide variety of uses. In 1939, more than 10,000 tons of the stuff was used. But these days, it has fewer practical applications but is still gathered in smaller amounts as bedding for flowers and some arts and craft-type activities. Number 11. Bald eagles nesting. The bald eagle is not only found in Louisiana. This extraordinary bird is the emblem of the entire nation. The bald eagle is a symbol of American strength and freedom and is one of the most important birds in the country. It is a bird of prey that can be found all throughout the United States, but there are huge numbers of them to be found nesting in Louisiana. This is a heartening thing for conservationists, as their numbers have dwindled so dramatically in the dark days of DDT use in the 1950s and 60s that between 1960 and 73, there were only 4 or 5 known pairs of these eagles nesting in the entire state. The species has made an incredible recovery, though, and a recent count had their numbers at nests of 647, with at least 356 active with eggs, young, and adult birds. And with plenty of stuff for these apex predators to eat within the wetlands, they continue to return to make their nests and raise their young. Number 10. Sunken boats. Where there is water, there are usually boats, and where there are boats, there's often old and broken boats or shipwrecks. This is actually a specific shipwreck that appeared along the banks of the Mississippi River in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in 2022. There were widespread droughts. Actually, they happened all across the world, but this area saw record lows in water levels as the rain refused to fall and the heat waves continued on. This revealed a shipwreck that appeared to have sunk either in the late 1800s or early 1900s, and it's believed that it was probably a trading boat called the Brook Hill. It's believed to have been sunk along with another vessel called the Estoma during a massive storm in 1915. Although they cannot be certain it's the same ship, there are only the bare bones of its shell left. There are historic records that would suggest that it could be that. Summer revealed all kinds of crazy things that have been lost in watery places, many of which had been placed there with the hope that they would never be seen again. Number 9. Old logging equipment. It's hard to imagine it now, but Louisiana was once a forest, a huge old-growth pine forest, in fact, and that covered much of the state with a lush green canopy. Naturally, though, this being America and all, it was ripe for exploitation, and there was a buck to be made, so someone needed to chop all that stuff down. During the late 19th century, the logging company set about chopping down most of the centuries-old conifers, and between the 1880s and the 1920s, thousands upon thousands of trees were felled. Sawmills took over, and settlements arrived in the forests. Millions were made, and the green landscape rapidly disappeared, being replaced with a landscape full of stumps, used up and exploited. The communities then became ghost towns, and the logging equipment laid there, abandoned. Nowadays, much of the evidence of that shockingly harsh stripping of the natural landscape is still rusting out all over the place where it was left. Number 8. Sinkholes. Sinkholes are a weird phenomenon. They often appear suddenly, as if from nowhere, and have been known to swallow up houses and other unfortunate objects that may be nearby. It's kind of crazy. While it may be true that sinkholes do appear in a completely unexpected manner from time to time, they are much more likely to develop slowly over many years, so just try not to be too alarmed. A sinkhole is generally a depression in the surface of the earth. They're usually caused by the movement of rock beneath, like limestone or gypsum, so it may be impossible to take an educated guess where they may be more likely to strike in the future. Although this is the most typical reason for sinkholes to form, there are other causes, and guess what? Some of them are man-made. What a shocker. Activities like digging foundations for buildings in places where the natural foundation of the earth is inadequate, or drilling for oil or other resources, or even the illegal dumping of waste from factories, have all been known to cause sinkholes. When you add storms and floods to the human activities, you may discover that you have a recipe for disaster. Louisiana is already pretty vulnerable to sinkholes on account of all the swampy land there, but there are not only natural factors at play. When the salt dome operated by petrochemical company Texas Brine collapsed back in 2012, it created a giant sinkhole that wreaked havoc on the natural environment of the area ever since. This is one of the largest ongoing man-made disasters in the United States, and it's literally swallowing the town that sits nearby. It continued to grow for many years following its initial formation, all the while sucking trees into the revolting soup, while simultaneously burping up barrels worth of crude oil. This is a nasty, filthy hole, and it's destroyed a huge area of Louisiana's natural landscape. In 2018, a judge ruled that the fault for the sinkhole's existence laid squarely at the door of the salt mining operator Texas Brine, as well as other big companies in the area. OxyChem and Vulcan were also named as contributing factors to the disastrous pollution and the 180-foot deep sinkhole. Things got held up in legal shenanigans as everyone tried to wriggle out of responsibility, but unfortunately for them, there's no hiding a bloody great big hole in the ground that goes around eating up things left, right, and center. Number 7. The giant salvania. As you're probably aware, invasive non-native plants can be extremely destructive to a lot of natural environments. But when you're dealing with water plants, the effects of the wrong plant in the wrong place can be catastrophic for the entire ecosystem. In Louisiana, there have been issues with several plants that shouldn't really be there, but the worst offender by far is that of the giant salvania. This is a plant that is native to Brazil but has been carelessly spread all around the world, and the results are proving to be a disaster. It damages the area by growing these huge and thick dense mats of vegetation that can cover vast areas and sometimes as thick as 3 feet. This means that all the native plants in the surrounding area get essentially smothered to death by the way of the giant salvania blocking the sunlight into the water. This kills off the phytoplankton, leaving no water surface available to the air, and in the end, it will starve the water of oxygen. This, in turn, kills the fish in the water along with the plant life. Then there's no longer any plant life or fish. The birds that live in the wetlands also will not survive anymore. It is literally an ecological disaster. Number 6. Derelict crab traps. All over the marshes, there are lost crab traps, also called ghost pots. These are the crab traps that have lost their floats and have not been recovered by their owners. Crab traps work in a simple way. The trap is baited and then plopped into the water, and then the crabs wander into the trap, attracted by the bait. That's usually how bait works, and then they find themselves trapped inside. The fishermen then go back out and recover the traps, retrieving the crabs and all of that usual stuff. But if a float is cut and the pot is lost, then that causes a problem. The crabs that are trapped inside will die, and as they die, they become new bait, and the process continues over and over and over. They don't only catch crabs, they'll trap anything that can fit inside. In the wetlands, there are a lot of things that will and do fit inside of these ghost pots, and then they simply die there. That includes creatures like turtles and fish as well. It's estimated that a staggering number of blue crabs are lost in this way. Some have that number at 12 million per year, and that doesn't include other species that also get stuck in the pots and expire. There are efforts underway to raise awareness of these issues and attempt to remove some of the deadly ghost pots before they pointlessly kill any more of the inhabitants of the marsh. Now it's time for today's fancy topic. What in the world could this possibly be? Some people have said it's a mutated fish found in the wetlands of Louisiana, but it looks a whole lot like a felled tree with a creepy-ass face to me. Could it be a long-lost creepazoid mutant monster, alligator tree trunk, fish creature, alien, or some other equally improbable piece of absolute twaddle? What do you think? Go on and let me know all about it in the comments down below. Number 5. Harley Quinn coral snake. The Harley Quinn coral snake also goes by many other names, including eastern coral, American cobra, candy stick snake, coral adder, Florida coral, red bead snake, and actually a whole host of other names. It can be found all throughout the southeastern United States, all the way from North Carolina down to Florida, and then through the south of Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. It lives in slightly different sorts of habitats all across these various states, but in Louisiana, it's associated with the sandy creek bottoms, preferring a dry environment but near the coastal plains. These snakes do eat a lot of lizards, birds, frogs, smaller snakes, fish, and insects, and there are plenty of them in the Louisiana habitats. It uses a brutal method to catch and consume its prey. The Harley Quinn coral will grab the unfortunate selection by the head, and then it will envenom it, waiting until it's become paralyzed but still alive, and then finally devour it. Number 4. Magnolia grandiflora. Magnolia blossom is the state flower of Louisiana, and these remarkable trees are the most ancient and primitive of plants. The fossil record for Magnolia dates back 60 million years. In fact, they're so old that they appeared before the bees, so their primary pollinators were beetles. These flowers make massive amounts of pollen that the beetles actually rely on as a food source. Of the 240 species of Magnolia worldwide, 8 of them are native to the United States. The most beautiful is perhaps the southern Magnolia. This species can be found all throughout the lowlands and has been planted extensively all across Louisiana. The southern Magnolia is renowned for its large, creamy white flowers and glossy green leaves that provide a stark contrast against the tree's rugged bark. Not only are these trees aesthetically pleasing, but they also emit a sweet, captivating fragrance that fills the air during the blooming season. Beyond their beauty, magnolias have been used in traditional medicine and are a symbol of grace and nobility. Their enduring presence through millions of years speaks to the resilience and adaptability of nature, making them a cherished part of the landscape and heritage of Louisiana. Number 3. The eastern screech owl. Another bird of prey, the eastern screech owl, is the smallest of the North American owls. These birds have yellow eyes and a big old head with almost no neck. Their ear tufts are pointed and give these owls a very distinctive silhouette, generally gray to reddish in color, and with patterned fancy feathers. The eastern screech owl has excellent camouflage amongst the trees. They're most active at night, although they are seldom seen, and they're more frequently heard and are known to have a spooky sort of call. These owls find plenty of prey within the wetlands, eating a diet of crayfish, rodents, amphibians, small birds, and insects, all of which are abundant within this ecosystem. Despite their small size, eastern screech owls are formidable predators, using their acute sense of hearing to locate prey, even under the cover of darkness. They are also known to utilize tree cavities for nesting, often taking over spaces left by woodpeckers or natural hollows. This adaptability extends to their habitat preferences, as they can be found in a variety of wooded environments, from rural to suburban areas. The presence of eastern screech owls is considered beneficial for controlling pest populations, showcasing their important role in the ecosystem's balance. Number 2. Feral hogs. Wild boars, or feral hogs as they are locally known, live in huge numbers in the rural parts of Louisiana. It's estimated that there may be more than 750,000 of them all throughout the state. So, naturally, hog hunting is a popular activity for people, and interestingly enough, that does not seem to be having a bad impact upon these animals. The wild boar is actually one of the more sustainable creatures that's out there. They will eat anything, and they frequently do, and they can cause a whole lot of damage to the environment if they're left unchecked. The population is currently exceeding the rate at which they are being controlled by hunting, and so they're constantly adding to their numbers. These are some of the fastest breeding creatures in the world, and so it's important to keep their numbers low so that they don't impact the native wildlife in a negative way. Despite efforts to manage their population, wild boars are incredibly resilient and adaptable, allowing them to thrive in a variety of environments. Their omnivorous diet and lack of natural predators in the region further contribute to their unchecked growth. The impact of these animals extends beyond environmental damage. They also pose significant challenges for farmers, as they can destroy crops and compete with livestock for resources. As a result, wildlife management agencies and local communities continue to seek effective strategies for controlling the wild boar population, balancing the need for conservation with the protection of local ecosystems and agriculture. Number 1. Crayfish burrows. Crayfish, crawfish, crawdads, mudbugs, yabbies, crawdaddies, known by a lot of different names, these clawed crustaceans may seem kind of tame, delicious, and certainly not something to have you waking up in a cold sweat in the night. I mean, unless you're unlucky enough to eat a bad one, of course. In fact, many of them aren't such bad news. But did you ever see a cheesy science fiction movie about an invasion of mutant creatures with 10 legs, the ability to clone themselves, and the hellbent desire to take over the entire world? Well, no need to be alarmed, but there is a species of crayfish that has been doing just that. Created by accident in an aquarium in 1995, the marbled crayfish has been spreading itself around the globe ever since, causing a terrifying existential threat to native species of crayfish and devastating the ecosystems in its wake. In just 2 short decades, this marbled crayfish has spread across the continents of Europe and Africa. Its monstrous ability to reproduce itself from its all-female population by cloning itself over and over again is what makes this particular sort of crayfish unstoppable. It really is the stuff of horror movies. And try not to have any nightmares. These critters are very common all across Louisiana. But it turns out they don't confine their habitats to the places they should, like the muddy banks of the marshes. These crustaceans also like to pop into people's yards and begin digging up their neatly manicured lawns to make their burrows. And that, my friends, is a hanging offense in the United States because you never mess with a man's lawn. It's actually in the Constitution, I think. That wraps up our journey through the intriguing greasy Grammy swamp for today. Which of these captivating facts truly sparked your interest? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section below. Additionally, have you ever explored the wetlands of Louisiana? I've been considering a visit and would greatly appreciate hearing about your experience. Don't forget to explore the other interesting content appearing on your screen, and I look forward to our next adventure together.